Hello, welcome to the Turret of Pleasure here in the Enchanted Kingdom of Hermione. I am the Lord Chamberlain of the Enchanted Kingdom, Zipp Gunn, and I'm your host on this channel. And we're going to continue today on my musical journey, a series of videos I'll be putting together that basically describe what happened to me in music when it happened. And this is kind of allows people to understand sort of where I'm coming from and why I like certain things and why I don't like other things and stuff like that. And I've kind of broken it into a bunch of sections that are usually dominated by a single band, which won't last forever, but it's convenient for these early bits. In part one, we talked about basically from when I was born in 1959, 15 days after Buddy Holly died. And basically up to the Beatles. And the Beatles were the big bang in my world of music. And the Beatles were pretty much everything and anything for at least a couple of years, which is a long time when you're a little kid. And they were joined in about 66 by the Stones. So part two was all about my discovery of the Rolling Stones and how they slotted in with the Beatles in my world. And that was kind of the way it went for a while. There was other bands. Now I'll say this, there were other bands came along, the Yardbirds. Yardbird stuff wasn't, where I lived here in Western Canada, Yardbird stuff, they weren't really big hits here. They were kind of minor hits. The records were kind of not that easy to find for me in my limited ability to source records. And I do remember one song I really liked, and I do believe it was the summer of 66, was Talk Talk by the Music Machine. And it was on some weird little label, like International Artist or something. And I never did ever in my life, when I was a kid, I never saw a copy of it, ever. I don't even know if it came out in Canada. And I'd hear it on the radio all the time, and I really dug it. And I really dug the Yardbirds' kind of big breakthrough songs, Over, Under, Sideways, Down, Shapes of Things, and especially Happenings 10 Years Time Ago, which I thought was absolutely amazing. But then, from where I sat, again, 67, 68, the Yardbirds basically disappeared. None of their subsequent stuff ever got played on the radio when I was listening to it anyways. And but there was a lot of good music, the wave was kind of breaking. And there was lots of new stuff, and the one I'm going to talk about mostly today was the result of my best friend at the time, a guy named Gary Lebrecht. We used to hang out, listen to records, and, do what 8 and 9-year-olds would do, I guess, in those days. And Gary had that magical thing, an older brother. And his brother Larry, who was, I think, about 5 years older, Larry was discovering, amongst other things, rock and roll. He ended up being a very fine blues guitarist, in fact. But Larry, of course, we looked up to him. We were little kids. And, there were rock concerts starting to happen in Vancouver, which, of course, Gary and I wouldn't be able to see. We were too little. But Larry managed to figure out a way to go to see a couple of these concerts in Vancouver. And one fine day, he announced that he was going to a concert in Vancouver. I think it was in 1968. And we said, who are you going to go see? He goes, I'm going to go see The Who. And to us, this was kind of not, so what? The Who? You mean the band that did Happy Jack? Yeah. And they did that My Generation song. Yeah. Literally, those are the only two songs that had entered my consciousness of theirs by this time. I don't think anywhere had been played on the radio around these parts. And they were, in my experience to that moment, they were a pop band, pure and simple. They were like the Bee Gees almost. So we were kind of like, oh, okay, The Who. And he went, and he came back, and he's like, oh my God, Oh my God, these guys. We're like, what, the who? No, no, these guys, they're amazing. They're the most amazing band I've ever seen. We're like, Happy Jack? No, 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 no. He said, you don't get it. That's nothing like what they sound like. So what do they sound like? Well, they got a new record out, and I bought it. He pulls out, he had a mono copy of Sellout, which was their brand new record. And I went, oh, wait a minute. Isn't there a single? The single I Can See for Miles had just come out. And I went, that's, oh, right. That's a pretty good song. Yeah, it's a really good song. Yeah, he goes, yeah, but like live. He said, they're just insane. And we're like, insane? He goes, no, like they smashed all their gear up at the end of the gig. And we went, get out of here. Larry's exaggerating. No, no, no word of a lie, man. The drummer kicked all his drums over and they just kicked everything around. The guitar player smashed his guitar. And we didn't believe him. We thought he was full of shit. And then I do believe there was a thing in the paper about this band at the Agrodome that caused such a kerfuffle by breaking all their, I do believe, rental instruments. And and I haven't looked this up since, but I do remember there was a lot of brow furrowing, and I think there was even a rumor they got arrested or something. And anyway, so we proceeded to play the living death out of this Sellout record, which is, of course, a big step up from Happy Jack, if you will. And I just completely fell in love with this record. It was and the single came out, and then, the single kind of makes sense now. And the whole idea that the record was it had a theme going through it, which, remember, this is before Sgt. Pepper's even. So I just fell in love with this band. And not too long after this, Tommy came out. And where I lived, Tommy did not really do much. I mentioned in the previous video, I used to buy delete singles, remaindered singles, from the Cunningham drugstore down the street for $0.25, which was my allowance at the time. And I got 2 of the singles off of Tommy in this box. I'm Free with We're Not Gonna Take It on the B-side, and Pinball Wizard with Dogs Part 2 on the B-side. Both of those were in the quarter bin because neither of those, at least around these parts, were particularly big singles. They maybe made, I don't know what they did, top 20 at least. They were, I'm Free especially, didn't really, really do much. And the record Tommy itself didn't really take off for literally a couple of years. And I bought it pretty much right away. And I really, really liked it. It was just so cool. And I remember a great moment of my childhood. I do believe it was grade 4, which makes me what, 9 or 10? Anyways, our classroom wanted to have a quote-unquote Christmas party. And the teacher says, does anybody here have a record player? And wouldn't you know it, I was the only kid in the class who had my own record player that I could move around and do what I wanted with. A couple of kids' parents had record players, but they couldn't take them to school. And so I said, well, I got one. Okay, good. Scotty, can you bring your record player? And anybody who wants can bring records, and we'll have a little record dance party. Okay. So I duly brought my record player, and I brought my copy of Tommy. And my buddy, Dave Peters, who was kind of one of the rougher, cool kids in the class, he bought this record by this weird band I'd never heard of that he got off his older brother. And he says, they're going to like this. You're going to love this, man. This is so good. And I had just vaguely kind of heard the name on a Seattle radio station, and I somehow got it into my head they were a Seattle band. And this record was called Led Zeppelin. Meanwhile, out of everybody else in my classroom, one kid brought a 7-inch single of Jingle Bell Rock, which everybody thought was just fabulous. And so we started playing Good Times, Bad Times. And my classmates I was this early 69 or 68. My classmates didn't like it, and they wanted to hear Jingle Bell Rock. So we played Jingle Bell Rock, fine. And then we played Pinball Wizard. They didn't like Pinball Wizard either. And so well, what do you want? Well, we want to hear Jingle Bell Rock again. Well, no, we just played it. Nope. Teacher steps in and says, tell you what, we'll do Jingle Bell Rock and then anything you two maniacs want, and then Jingle Bell Rock again. And that was our Christmas party. Tommy by the Who, Led Zeppelin's first album, and a whole lot of Jingle Bell Rock. And the Who, of course, by this point, they were really cooking with gas. And I remember for a birthday, I do believe, I'm not sure exactly, but I had befriended a little mom and pop record store in Victoria called Modern Sound Records, and they were a really nice couple. They would give me their old Billboard magazines, which were full of cool ads that you could make into posters, full page ads that were really cool. My bedroom was just covered in all these Billboard ads. And I would do this weird thing where Billboard would always have these little sort of capsule reviews, always saying good things. And beside them would be a little tiny reproduction of the cover. And these were almost always the same size. So I got to cutting these out. I had a big pile of them from dozens and dozens of issues of Billboard. And so I made a little imaginary record store in my room of miniature album covers on Lego racks. I was a weird kid, I swear. And I fantasized about owning the coolest record store in town, which ultimately I sort of did, which is kind of neat. But Modern Sound Records, I bought lots of good records there. And I do believe first one I bought there would have been Live at Leeds. And Live at Leeds, when it came out, was a 6-song LP that was completely unlike what you expected when you saw the track listing, but which you had to open the record to do because it looked like a bootleg. And back then I was so young, I didn't even know what a bootleg was. What is a bootleg? It's meant to look like a bootleg. Crackling noise is okay. Do not correct. I don't get it. Why is the label handwritten? It was beyond me. And when you get into the record, there was one single off of Live at Leeds, which was Summertime Blues, which, if I remember correctly, the B-side was the studio version of John Entwistle's Heaven and Hell. Now, all Who maniacs now know that the original Live at Leeds was a heavily truncated version of that concert. And the subsequent reissue, there's been 2. I settled for the first one because it features everything from the concert except the Tommy stuff, which I don't need. If you really, really, really want it, you can get the double super fancy version with all the Tommy. If I find it in the thrift store, I'll buy it, but that ain't going to happen. And Live at Leeds is, in my humble opinion, to this day, the greatest live album ever made. And one of the great, great rock and roll records. They do a little, like they do a Mose Allison song. They do an early hit of theirs, or, well, on the original issue, like Substitute was there. Substitute was a really obscure song. Young Man Blues was by Mose Allison, who I had barely heard of. Shaken All Over was familiar to us Canadian people because Chad Allen had done it. In England, it was Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. So that was kind of a weird thing, too. And then there's Summertime Blues, Eddie Cochran. That was it. And then the B-side of the record was really weird because you had this insane, distended, crazy version of what starts out as My Generation. It just turns into a complete, I don't know what you would call it, tour de force of rock performance, improvising maybe. And then the record ends with a really silly performance of Magic Bus, which is actually great. And as a live album when it came out at the time, it was completely unlike any other live albums because it just didn't do the obvious things that in those days live albums did. And to this day, I think it's a fabulous record. And then, they kept going through the 70s, Who's Next, which is, a classic record. And then there are more sort of diminishing returns after Who's Next. Quadrophenia came out, very ambitious record. I have it on vinyl in the studio. I'll show you what I got here. I don't have much. I don't have much here. Most of my Who is on vinyl. What do I got here? That's the gist of it right there. Um, I found the My Generation Deluxe Edition for cheap somewhere, and it's cool to have, but I don't need it, and you probably don't either. It's their first album. It features a couple of really funny James Brown covers, but it's lots of charming stuff. Their version of Leavin' Here is great. Quick One While She's Away was their second album, or yeah, I think it was their second album. And this has A Quick One While She's Away, the very first rock opera. It also was a strange record for them because they had signed a publishing deal where everybody got to write songs or had to write songs. And so they started this policy, which lasted for a while, where the best song would be the A side. Well, that would be a Pete Townsend song. And the B side would be reserved for one of the other three fellows' songs. And John Entwistle filled the gap quite admirably with good song after good song. Boris the Spider, I think, was one. What was the other? Whiskey Man is a great song on this. There's a couple of Keith Moon songs on here, which are insane. I mean, the man never wrote a normal song. And I do believe there might even be one. Is there a single Daltrey song on here? So this is a bit of a hodgepodge. The quality jumps all over the place. What's this got down here? This has extra tracks on it. Man with the Money, In the City, I've Been Away, Doctor. Oh, this has Disguises on it. And Bucket Tea, which of course is probably Keith Moon's doing. A pretty good record. I got it for cheap somewhere. Needless to say, I've got the Sellout. Now, again, remember, I grew up with the mono. And this comes with the mono copy, which is really cool. As just like I remember it. It also, of course, comes with the stereo. The stereo is quite different. And having not been used to it, until I bought this 10 or so years ago, it's quite interesting. It's not the version I grew up with. So it has a million bonus tracks on it, which I'm not even going to start to go into, but there's all kinds of, US single mono mix, the early version of Relax in stereo, Jaguar, that's a good song. Early Tattoo, early Our Love Was, which is great. The Premier Drums song. This record, in case you don't know, they did mock ads in between songs as if this was Radio London, one of the offshore radio stations. And so they were mostly done by John Entwistle. They did Heinz Baked Beans. They did a thing for Pimple Cream. They did Premier Drums. They did Jaguar, but it didn't actually make it on the record. Their hope was that Jaguar would give them cars for doing it, and apparently Jaguar said, no, we're not going to give you cars. However, Keith did get a whole lot of free Premier Drums, so yeah, I guess it worked that way. I have the original version of this because there's one song on here that's not on the other one. Yeah, that's how silly I am. The aforementioned, you gotta have this record. Come on. This is just so great. The opening, Heaven and Hell by John Entwistle, I cannot think of a better concert opener ever. It's just incredible. And the fact that it's not even a Townsend song just shows you the scope of the band. This band wasn't all about Pete Townsend. It really was the sum of its parts. Who's Next? Now, this is the one that's the sort of current edition, if you will. It features a whole lot of songs from the Lifehouse Project that didn't make it anywhere. The Who version of Pure and Easy, Baby Don't You Do It, Water, I Don't Even Know Myself. There's another version of Behind Blue Eyes. So the bonus tracks, I think there's Al Cooper was involved in the bonus tracks. What do you say about this record? This is possibly the great hard rock record of all time. Baba O'Reilly has some very super creative synth stuff in it. That back when it came out, I thought this was cool. Man, and I thought the synth in Won't Get Fooled Again was really cool, and it's still very sublime. It doesn't sound like Jump by Van Halen, let's put it that way. The tones are really neat and sort of organic and really synthetic, and yet they're very organic as well. My Wife, of course, great John Entwistle song. there isn't a bad song on this. I mean, is there? Let me think. No, I mean, Love Ain't for Keeping is a great song. Um, One of those things where I think they were trying to make a double album. It didn't quite happen. They made it a super saturated single album. It's an A plus. Everybody should own this record. What else have I got here? I got the Who BBC Sessions. Bought this a while back. I think I got it fairly cheap. It's cool. It's Odds and Sods, which of course is the name of the first ever Who outtakes record. It was called Odds and Sods, and now everything is in Odds and Sods. This has a lot of early stuff on it. It's got Long Live Rock. It's got does this have is it something on it that I was kind of into, but now I can't remember what it is. Good if you're a Who fan, you want it. If you're not a Who fan, start somewhere else. And I look at this. I have an original. This must have been in a free pile. Their last good record. There, I said it, and I'm glad. 3 John Entwistle songs on them. The best one's called 905, about a robot. There's a song on it called Sister Disco, which I know is not the best song, but it does have a couple of songs I quite like. There's a song in here called Guitar and Pen, and it's sort of a minor song, but I do really like it. Strangely, it got played a lot on FM radio. Who Are You, of course, is the famous song from this. Trick of the Light is another good Entwistle song. This is kind of like the last record Keith Moon is on. And it's the last kind of really mature rock statement Townsend made before he really started getting, kind of reading his reviews. And then I have no idea where I got this. The Who, Then and Now. I'm going to have to, this was somebody's free bin. And Old Red Wine. What's that doing on here? You'll notice now I don't have Quadrophenia, and I've been looking to get it on CD, but I don't want to pay $20 for it. I do have it on LP. I've got the original book and all that stuff. I've got an original German pressing of My Generation, which is in really good shape still. And another weird one I've got, which I really like, I think it's called Two's Missing. And it's yet another Odds and Sods. I think there's one called Who's Missing, and then Two's Missing. And Two's Missing features some real barrel scrapings, but it's got things like Wasp Man on it, which was a Keith Moon B-side that absolutely has to be heard to be believed. And it came out, I've got it on vinyl, it came out in the 80s, just, whatever, better put out a Who record. And pretty much everything they've done since. The Warner Brothers stuff, I don't like it at all. The last record, which was basically the two of them, of course, then they all started dying. And again, the thing about the Who, the sum of the parts, John Entwistle's solo records, I don't like any of them. I found a John Entwistle live concert recording. I think it was on, what do you call it? Flower Hour, Big Biscuit Hour. It's on that label. It does all those things. And it's okay. Best song on it is Whiskey Man, so whatever. But he actually toured with his own band, and actually it cost him money. He never did that well. But he just really liked to be on the road. Maybe the lifestyle appealed to him. Certainly it's what killed him. And, as great a bass player as you could ever hope to hear. And he littered his records with good people, Joe Vitale and guys like that. But for whatever reason, he was good for a couple of great Who songs and album. And once you stretched him a little further than that, it just kind of didn't get that great. Keith, of course, made the one unforgettable solo album where I swear they mixed up the backing vocals louder than his vocals. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they recorded that. I don't think it sold diddly. Roger's solo records, I can take or leave. They mostly suffer from sort of miscasting. They'll get a song by whomever, some professional songwriter, and you hear Roger and you go, why is this such a lame song with this fabulous voice that I'm used to, I'm used to hearing it sing Pete Townsend songs. And so the best thing Roger did, absolutely, as a solo artist, was his, I think, maybe last record where he teamed up with Wilco Johnson, and they did this record. What the hell's it called? And I haven't been able to find it. It's hard to get in this corner of the world. But I've heard bits of it, and it sounds fantastic. And good old poor old Wilco just passed away. But Wilco was suffering from what was looking to be certain death cancer. And of course, being Wilco Johnson, he wasn't going to go down without a fight. So him and Daltrey put out this hard-assed R&B record. Best thing Daltrey's ever done, I think. So, yeah, looking for that still. And so, yeah. And the Who endured with me through my next phases. And I remember when I discovered the Who, I was about 9. And things started happening fast in music. 1968, you could say, was maybe the birth of rock, if you will. No more sort of rock and roll. We were getting rock by then. And things moved quickly, in my world at least. And, to a certain extent, I was still dependent on the radio for enlightening me about what was coming out, what was new. But another very important development around about this point, and things are going to kind of blur together a bit here, but was the advent of FM radio. And FM radio, where I grew up, was Vancouver. I've lived in Victoria, but I could get CKLG FM. And CKLG FM was like a lot of radio stations in those days, pretty loosey-goosey and freeform. They would do things like play an entire Firesign Theatre record at 3 in the morning. So you turn the radio on, you're like, what? What is going on? Or they would play the song, God, there was one song called Slush by the Bonzo Dog Band. And it was very common to play like an hour of music without announcing what it all was. And if you go look up Slush by the Bonzo Dog Band, and imagine that just pops out of your radio at 2:30 in the morning in between a bunch of weird psychedelic music. And so FM radio was where I started discovering stuff that wasn't on the charts. And I probably started listening to the hipper radio stations. We're probably in about 68. 68 was when sort of Cream, which I originally thought were called Crane. I Feel Free was their first big single here, and I really got into that. And I kind of got into the more instrumental, jammy, caterwauling stuff. But only some of it. Like, I never got into the Grateful Dead. They never really were popular up here, on the radio anyway. I briefly discovered the Grand Funk Railroad. And when I was 9, I thought they were pretty cool. I remember a friend of mine lent me their first live album, and I thought it was pretty cool. But then once I started discovering other stuff, I thought it was actually kind of terrible. And to this day, I still laugh at the Grand Funk Railroad. And I've had more comments on my YouTube channel probably ever about anything. I've had more comments about just the fact that I don't like Grand Funk than everything else put together, which makes my heart sing, because I think it's great that there are people out there that, hey man, what the hell do you know about music? Grand Funk rock. Opinion I don't agree with. I think Grand Funk are one of the great expedient rock bands of all time. But we'll get to them later. They show up in, well, maybe when did they show up in my lexicon? 69 maybe. When was that first live album? An important record also, or a couple of important records. I'll go into this now. The major labels started realizing that it was a great idea to simply give sampler records of their latest batches of stuff away for free or almost for nothing. And this was a trend that was actually popular for a while. But in the late 60s, there was several. There was RCA Victor put out a record called Group Quake. And it wasn't very good because RCA didn't have a lot of great bands on their label. I can't remember what was on Group Quake. I guess I'm assuming the Jefferson Airplane. I do remember the Youngbloods were on it because they had a bit of a hit with Come Together. I'm going to look that one up because I don't know if I even have a copy of that anymore. And it was okay. And then Capitol decided to put out two records. One was the New Sound of Angel, which was their classical label, and the other one was the New Sound of Capitol. And Capitol kind of reinvented themselves. They made a new logo, got rid of the Capitol building and the rainbow label, and they changed it to this pukey green color with this sort of goofy circle logo, and it was all new. And the new spirit of Capitol, I think it was called. And this record had my first introductions to a lot of people. Imagine a record that introduced you to Steve Miller Band, Linda Ronstadt, Mississippi Fred McDowell, the Edgar Broughton Band, and Pink Floyd, to name just five of them. Guitar Jr. was on it. Joe South was on it. The Sons of Champlain were on it. They were all, and it was actually a great album to listen to. It was like having your own little radio station of exclusively Capitol artists. And they sold it for $1, and this record was everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Every record store had a rack of these out front. And like, this was before, anybody'd really heard of Pink Floyd or even maybe Steve Miller. The first time I'd ever heard of Steve Miller. And a third record that came out roughly around this time, maybe 1969 or 70, was Columbia put out a record called Different Strokes. And this was a groove crammed, and I mean groove crammed. It had 1,000,000 songs on it, many of which were so heavily edited as to be actually kind of funny. There's a version of Maggie, but Redbone on it, that's 1 minute and 45 seconds long, which, I mean, they do the singing and then it fades out. You don't get to hear any of the great jam. There's a 4-minute excerpt of the Soft Machines' Out Bloody Rages, which I think is 18 minutes long, on the third album that they're promoting. There's a lot of stuff on this. The Columbia one was all over the map. Tom Rush, Fraser and DeBolt, I remember on it. Remember them? God, I wish I had it in front of me. I didn't even think to pull these out. They're all at the studio. And that record was everywhere for 99 cents. And you wonder if it helped sell any records. But the prize goes to Warner Reprise, because run by the late great Stan Cornin, I would think that they were the first label to do what they called twofers. And the idea was that they put out, and I think their first one was 68. They put out I can't even remember which one it was, Songbook maybe? And it was a double album of all this new stuff on the Warner Reprise label. And you paid $2 for it, $1 a record. You'd have to get it. They were only mail order, apparently. I never saw them in stores. They did a single record one for just stuff that was Frank Zappa, called Zap Ed. It was only straight and bizarre label stuff. And they did they did this first one, and sometimes they had unreleased stuff. Like there's one I've got that has these really neat little Van Dyke Park synthesizer blips on them for like Ice Capades music and Datsun commercials, and again, really well put together programs, so you could play it as an album, and it worked as an album. And according to Cornyn, anyway, in his great book Exploding, it helped promote their product, and they did these routinely for years. I think they would have done it for at least 10 years, because I remember the last one they did, Troublemakers, I think it was called. It had like the Pretenders on it, so it had some Sire artists. I think maybe even the Ramones were on it. And then they stopped making them because I think they were probably too expensive to make to sell for $2. But I collect them whenever I see one, I buy it. And so these sampler records, combined with FM radio coming into the picture, meant that the whole pop group obsession of the 60s was kind of melting a little bit, and I was starting to discover all kinds of new music. Not, I was pretty much a pop music guy. I'd heard classical music, but I didn't even understand that there was different genres of music. I just thought there was music. And only when I started listening to the sampler records and the FM radio and stuff did I realize that there was whole new universes out there. And because I liked weird stuff, like I really dug Revolution #9. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world because I like weird. I loved Satanic Majesties. Um, so I love the fact that Tommy had an 11-second song on it. That to me was fascinating. So the new world that kind of opened up to me really, really blew my mind, and it took me all kinds of different places. I kind of laugh when I think back about what some of the things I thought were accurate. Um, but we'll get to that in the next one. This one was about the Who, and to this day I listen to a lot of Who. You just can't beat them for rock music, for hard rock. And if you have any interest whatsoever in rock music, you should probably buy a copy of Live at Leeds. And if you like the idea of their more pop side, I still think you should listen to Sellout because I think it's a fabulous record stem to stern. So there you go. I'm going to learn my cover version of The Amazing Horse, I think. And maybe put that on YouTube as well at some point. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button, and that way you'll get these as they come out. I think I'm going to dribble them out. I was going to put them all out at once, and then I'm too lazy. Please forgive my laziness. Sometimes I don't feel like doing any of this stuff. Sometimes I do. Today I do. So I get to watch the Titanic sink again. Never gets old. Anyway, take care of each other. We'll talk at you later.